What if your wedding cake turns your groom into a monster? The day was picture perfect. A white wedding dress, beautiful flowers, and an amazing cake that looked too good to be true. But as the groom took his first bite, his skin began to change. His eyes turned wild, and he became unrecognizable. What was in that cake? A secret ingredient? A curse? Or something else entirely? Let's find out. Ada stared at her reflection in the mirror, lost in thought. The wedding was just few days away, and everything was falling into place. The decorations were finalized, the guest list was set, and her dress was a dream. But despite the perfection of it all, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in her gut. It all started the day Chinedu's sister, Ijeoma, insisted that her best friend Nkem bake the wedding cake. Ada had had her own baker in mind, someone reputable and experienced in baking wedding cake that dazzled guests. But Ijeoma had been adamant, and Ada, not wanting to cause any tension with her soon-to-be sister-in-law, had reluctantly agreed. Still, the decision left her uneasy. Nkem's cakes are to die for, Ijeoma had gushed. And she's family practically, and it would mean so much to her. Ada had smiled then, but her mind was unsettled. Something about Nkem had always felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way Nkem always seemed to be around, always inserting herself into situations with Chinedu. Ada had even caught Nkem staring at Chinedu a few times, with a look that wasn't entirely innocent. But Ada pushed those thoughts aside, reasoning that she was just being paranoid. After all, Nkem was Ijeoma's best friend, and they had known each other for years. As the wedding day approached, Ada's reservations only grew stronger, but she silenced them, convincing herself that everything would be fine. It had to be. Nkem had always admired Chinedu from afar. What had started as innocent attraction in her teenage years had grown into something deeper, something obsessive. He was handsome, successful, and everything she wanted in a man. But there was one problem. Chinedu saw her as nothing more than his sister's best friend. When Chinedu announced his engagement to Ada, Nkem's world was shattered. How could Ada, a woman she barely knew, scoop in and take the man she had always dreamed of? It wasn't fair. Nkem was supposed to be the one walking down the aisle with Chinedu, not Ada. So when Ijeoma insisted that Nkem bake the wedding cake, a twisted idea began to form in her mind. She would lace the cake with a love potion, something that would make Chinedu fall madly in love with her the moment he ate it. But how would she achieve that? The cake was for the entire wedding. She decided to prepare a special one just for Chinedu and tag it for him, and another one tagging it for her, for Ada. So when it was time for the couple to feed themselves, there would be no mistake. The thought felt like a perfect plan to her. She didn't need him to be her husband right away. She just needed him to crave her, to want her above Ada. Once that desire was planted, she would figure out the rest. Nkem knew exactly where to go. There was a witch doctor she had visited before for other smaller requests. This time, she asked for something stronger, something that would make Chinedu's hers forever. The witch doctor, a wrinkled old man with piercing eyes, listened to her request without judgment. "It is a dangerous game you are playing," he warned. "Love potions are not to be taken lightly. Too much and you risk losing control. Add only 3 drops, no more, no less. That will make him desire you without causing chaos." Nkem nodded, but her mind was already racing with the possibilities. She didn't care about the risks. She wanted Chinedu, and this was her chance. The night before the wedding, Nkem prepared the cake in her small kitchen. She worked diligently, creating the perfect layers, each one fluffier and sweeter than the last. But as she reached for the bottle of love potion, her hands trembled. The witch doctor's words echoed in her mind. 3 drops, no more, no less. She hesitated, but then, in a moment of reckless excitement, she added 5 drops. "I'll make sure he loves me twice as much," she whispered to herself. As the potion mixed into the batter, Nkem felt a surge of satisfaction. She couldn't wait to see the effects. Tomorrow, during the cake cutting ceremony, Chinedu would eat his piece and everything would change. Ada would be nothing but a forgotten bride. The wedding day came bright and beautiful, with the air filled with anticipation and excitement. Guests gathered in their finest attire, and Ada, looking stunning in her gown, felt her nerves settled as she walked down the aisle towards Chinedu. He looked at her with love, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. The wedding ceremony went off without a hitch. The vows were heartfelt. The kiss was passionate. And as they were pronounced husband and wife, applause rang through the hall. Ada beamed with excitement. Her earlier reservations about Nkem and the cakes were all forgotten. Finally, it was time for the cake. Nkem stood by the sideline, her heart racing as the waiters wheeled out her masterpiece. It was a towering cake, decorated with detailed designs that drew admiration from the guests. But Nkem wasn't interested in their reactions. She had eyes only for Chinedu and couldn't wait to see the moment the portion took hold. Chinedu and Ada stood hand in hand as they prepared to cut the cake. Chinedu's smile was wide, his eyes full of love as he fed Ada with her own piece as label. She laughed, wiping a bit of frosting from her lips before feeding him his own slice. As the cake touched Chinedu's tongue, Nkem held her breath. The portion was in that piece, and as he swallowed, she waited for the magic to happen. But something was wrong. Almost immediately after eating the cake, Chinedu's face contorted. He blinked rapidly, then held his stomach as a sharp pain shot through him. His smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion and anger. "Ada," he muttered, his voice low and strained. "Something doesn't feel right." But Ada couldn't react. Chinedu's body began to shake violently. He collapsed to the floor, struggling in pain as the girl shocked and rushed to his side. Ada screamed, kneeling beside him, unsure of what was happening. But Nkem knew she had made a terrible mistake. 5 drops. She had added too much. And now the potion wasn't just making Chinedu desire her. It was doing something far worse. Chinedu's body began to change. His eyes turned bloodshot and his skin grew pale. He stood up suddenly, pushing Ada aside with a strength that wasn't his own. His breathing became uneven, and he let out a deep, harsh sound that sent chills down the spines of everyone present. "Chinedu," Ada cried, terrified. "What's happening to you?" But Chinedu didn't respond. His eyes, once filled with love, were now wide with rage. He began to lash out, throwing tables aside and shoving guests out of his way. His movements were unpredictable, his strength unnatural. It was as though a beast has taken over his body. The crowd panicked, scrambling to get away from the angry groom. But Ada refused to leave his side. She grabbed his arms, trying to pull him back. But he shoved her to the ground, his eyes flashing with something unrecognizable. Amidst the chaos, Ijeoma rushed to her friend Nkem, who stood frozen in place, her face pale with shock. "Nkem, what's happening?" Ijeoma demanded. As she had gone home to get some items when the drama began. Nkem stuttered, unable to form a response. The reality of what she had done was sinking in, and panic gripped her. I think I made a mistake," Nkem whispered, her voice trembling. "I added too much." "Added too much of what?" Ijeoma asked. "What are you talking about?" But Nkem couldn't answer. She had destroyed everything. Her selfish desires had turned Chinedu into a monster, and now there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Ada, desperate for answers, turned to Ijeoma. "What is going on? What's wrong with your brother?" "I have never seen him like this," Ada said. Ijeoma hesitated, but when she saw the anguish in Ada's eyes, she broke down. "It's Nkem. She did something to the cake. I don't know what, but it's all because of her." Ada's heart sank. Nkem? The woman she had always felt uneasy around? She couldn't believe it. But as she watched Chinedu rampage through the hall, she knew something dark had taken hold of him. And it had everything to do with the cake, because it all started as soon as Chinedu had his piece of cake. Ada turned to Nkem, her eyes burning with rage. "What did you do to him?" she screamed, grabbing her by her shoulder. "What did you put in the cake?" Nkem sobbed, collapsing under the weight of her guilt. It was supposed to make him love me, but I added too much. I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear." Ada was stunned. A love potion? Nkem had tried to steal her husband with a love potion. And instead, she had turned him into something else entirely. "There is no way to reverse it," Nkem sobbed, clutching her eyes together as if she was in prayer. "The witch doctor said it would be too dangerous to tamper with, especially if I added more than the required amount. Ada's mind spun, her anger boiling over. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This woman, Nkem, had not only tampered with her wedding, but had poisoned Chinedu with something beyond human understanding. And now her beloved husband was a raging monster, tearing their wedding reception like a madman. "You have ruined everything," Ada shouted, pushing Nkem away in disgust. "Look at my husband. Take a look at him." The guests who hadn't fled stood in shock, their faces pale as they watched Chinedu continue his violent rampage. Tables were overturned, glass shattered across the floor. The decorations were torn down. A few men tried to restrain him, but his strength was unnaturally powerful. Ijeoma rushed to Ada's side, her face white with fear. "Ada, we have to stop him. This can't go on." "I know," Ada said. "But how? How do you reverse something like this?" "I don't know," Ijeoma admitted, shaking her head. "We need help. Someone who knows about these things." But suddenly, Ada remembered the witch doctor Nkem had mentioned. Maybe, just maybe, he could undo what Nkem had done. Without another thought, she turned back to Nkem, who was still sobbing on the floor. "Where is the witch doctor?" Ada demanded. "Tell me where he is." Nkem looked up at her with tear-filled eyes. I can take you there," she stammered. "But it's far. It's in a village outside the city. It will take time." "We don't have time," Ada said. "You have destroyed my husband, and you must fix him. Get up, let's go." With no other choice, Ada, Ijeoma, and Nkem left the chaos of the wedding behind and rushed towards the outskirts of the city. The roads were dark, and the air was thick with tension. Ada could barely hold herself together. Her eyes and heart ached at the thought of Chinedu, the man she had just married, being reduced to a beast because of Nkem's selfishness. Nkem sat at the back seat of the car, silent and full of guilt. Ijeoma too was on edge, unable to believe that her best friend had caused this nightmare. Ada gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind focused on one thing: saving Chinedu. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the witch doctor's small isolated hut. The night was quiet, with only the sound of crickets filling the air. Nkem hesitated as they reached the entrance, her fear evident. "We have to do this," Ada said firmly. "You owe us that much." They pushed open the door to the hut, revealing a dimly lit space filled with strange objects and the smell of burning herbs. The witch doctor sat at the corner, his old withered face expressionless as he regarded the three women. "You have come back," he said to Nkem, his voice low and harsh. "I warned you, didn't I? You have caused great trouble. I saw everything." Nkem nodded, unable to speak, her guilt and shame suffocating her. Ada stepped forward, her desperation clear in her voice. "You must help us," she pleaded. "You must undo what she did. My husband is not himself anymore." The witch doctor eyed Ada for a long moment before speaking. "There is a price for every mistake," he said slowly. Undoing what had been done is not easy, nor is it guaranteed. Ada's heart sank, but she wouldn't give up. Please, I will do whatever it takes. Just help him. The witch doctor rose from his seat and moved towards a small cabinet, pulling out a bottle filled with dark liquid. There is one way, he said, holding the bottle up to the light. But it will not be easy. You must get him to drink this. It will counter the effect of the potion, but only if he drinks it willingly. Nkem, still shaking with fear, spoke up, but he's not in control of himself anymore. How are we supposed to get him to drink it? The witch doctor looked at her, his gaze cold. That's your problem to solve. Armed with the antidote, Ada, Ijeoma, and Nkem raced back to the wedding hall. As they pulled up, the scene was even worse than they had left. Most of the guests had fled, leaving behind overturned chairs, broken glasses, and torn decoration. Chinedu was nowhere to be seen, and the few people who remained were gathered together, whispering in fear. Ada, Ijeoma said urgently, we need to find him before he hurts someone or himself. The three women spread out, searching the hall for any sign of Chinedu. The air was thick with tension, and Ada's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe how drastically the night had gone out of control. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the hall. Ada turned just in time to see Chinedu burst through a set of double doors, his eyes wild and his body trembling with rage. He was no longer the man she had married. He was something else, something terrifying. Chinedu, Ada cried out, rushing towards him. But he didn't respond. His eyes were glassy and his movements were erratic. He stumbled towards her, knocking over anything in his path. Ada held the bottle of antidote tightly in her hand, her mind racing. How could she get him to drink it willingly? He was no longer the man she knew, and reasoning with him seemed impossible. Nkem and Ijeoma rushed to her side, with fear on their faces. What are we going to do? Ijeoma asked. Ada looked at the bottle in her hand, and then at Chinedu, who was still thrashing about in anger. An idea began to form in her head, one that was risky, but it was their only shot. We have to remind him of who he is, Ada said. If there's any part of the old Chinedu left, we need to reach it. Ada approached Chinedu slowly, careful not to provoke him further. She could see the torment in his eyes and battle between the potion and the man she loved. Tears filled her eyes as she remembered the kind, loving man she had married only a few hours ago. Chinedu, she whispered, her voice soft but firm. I know you are there. I know that this isn't who you are. I love you. For a moment, Chinedu hesitated, his wide eyes flickering with trace of recognition. Ada took that as a sign to keep going. I love you more than anything, she continued, stepping closer. Remember our dreams, our plans for the future. Remember how we'll always be there for each other. Chinedu's grunts softened, his body trembling less violently. his eyes locked into hers. And for the first time, Ada saw a flicker of the man she knew. "Chinedu, please," she begged, holding up the bottle of antidote. "Drink this, and everything will be okay. We can be together again, I promise." With shaky hands, she offered him the bottle. Chinedu stared at it, his expression torn between confusion and anger. Ada held her breath, praying that the love they shared would be enough to break through the darkness. Slowly, almost painfully, Chinedu reached out and took the bottle from her hands. He hesitated for a long moment before bringing it to his lips. Ada's heart raced as he swallowed the liquid, each gulp feeling like an eternity. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, Chinedu's body convulsed, his muscles tensing as if they were fighting against an unseen force. He collapsed to the floor, struggling in pain as the antidote worked its way through his system. Ada rushed to his side, holding him tightly as he gasped for breath. "It's okay," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to be okay." After what felt like hours, Chinedu's body finally relaxed. His breathing steadied, and when he opened his eyes, they were no longer wide and glassy. They were his eyes, full of love and recognition. "Ada," he whispered weakly, his voice barely audible. I'm here, Chinedu." He tried to sit up, but his body was weak from the ordeal. Ada helped him, wrapping her arms around him as they sat together on the floor of the ruined wedding hall. "I'm so sorry," Chinedu said, his voice filled with regret. "I don't know what happened." "It's not your fault," Ada reassured him, brushing a tear from his cheek. "We'll get through this together." As they sat there, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives, Ada couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Chinedu was back, and that was all that mattered. But as they held each other, a shadow fell across them. Ada looked up to see Nkem standing nearby, her eyes red from crying. She took a hesitant step towards them, but her guilt weighed her down like chains. Nkem opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her best friend's brother had nearly lost his life because of her selfishness and obsession. Ijeoma stood beside Nkem, her arms crossed and her expression tied to disapproval. Ada, however, held Chinedu close and looked Nkem dead in the eyes. "Nkem," Ada began, "I know you didn't mean for it to go this far, but your actions almost destroyed everything. You put your own desires above everyone else. And Chinedu would have lost his life." Nkem burst into tears, her legs giving way as she collapsed to her knee. "I'm sorry. I never wanted this. I just wanted him to notice me. I've loved him for years, but he never saw me the way I wanted him to." "That's because you never let him see the real you," Ijeoma said sharply. "You were so busy trying to manipulate him. You didn't think about what love really means. And now you have to live with what you have done." Chinedu, though weak, managed to pull himself up, leaning heavily on Ada for support. He looked at Nkem, his sister's best friend, with a mixture of pity and anger. Nkem, you didn't have to do this. If I was meant to love you, it would have happened naturally. You can't force love. Nkem couldn't meet his gaze, her tears streaming uncontrollably. I know that now, she whispered. Ada felt a surge of anger rising again, but swallowed it down. There would be no more rage, no more violence tonight. Nkem's brokenness was enough punishment for now. Ada had what mattered most. Her husband was back, and they had survived the nightmare. I don't know what to say to make this right, Nkem continued. I will leave. I will never come near either of you again. Ada took a deep breath. Leaving won't fix anything, Nkem. You have to own up to what you have done. Not just to us, but to yourself. If you ever hope to live without this guilt, you need to change. Find real love, not through portions or trick, but by being honest with yourself and others. Nkem nodded weakly, wiping her tears. She stood up and slowly backed away through the back door, leaving without saying any word. The heavy silence of the hall settled around them as she disappeared into the night. The days that followed were difficult. Chinedu struggled with the after effect of the portion, his strength and energy drained by the ordeal. Ada remained by his side, nursing him back to health and comforting him through the trauma of what he had experienced. Their wedding, once a symbol of joy, had turned into a tragic memory. But the love between them had only grown stronger through the adversity. Together, they moved past the disaster, leaning on each other for strength. Ada's family, who had initially been shaken by the event, rallied around the couple, providing support and love as Chinedu recovered. Nkem, on the other hand, disappeared from their lives. She left town without a word to anyone, consumed by guilt and consequences of her action. No one heard from her again. Weeks later, Chinedu finally regained his strength. On a quiet evening, the two of them sat on the porch of their home. I still can't believe what happened, Chinedu said quietly, his hand gently resting on Ada's. If you hadn't been so strong, so determined to save me, I don't know where I'll be right now. Ada smiled. We are a team, she whispered. No matter what happens, we will always face it together. Chinedu kissed the top of her head. I'm so lucky to have you. And I'm so lucky to have you too, Ada replied. I don't care about the cake or the wedding disaster. What matters is that we are together, and nothing can take that away. The story teaches that love cannot be forced or manipulated. True love grows naturally through trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Nkem's attempt to force Chinedu's love using a portion backfired. And this shows that any attempt to control one's feelings for selfish reasons would lead to disastrous consequences. The story also teaches that action driven by jealousy and obsession can lead to harm, not only for the intended target, but also for the ones committing the act. Nkem's desire blinded her to the dangers of her actions, and she ultimately had to face the consequences of her actions.